Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Slay Security Plus. It is Monday, February 19th, 2024. I am Taylor McDonald. I'm your host for this evening, and we are going to be covering Domain 2, Section or Objective 2.4. This deck, I prepped it for 2.4 and 2.5. I've got a lot to cover, so we're just going to do 2.4 tonight, and then I'm going to make a few adjustments for next week, and we're going to cover a little bit more, digging into some of the injection attacks and things like that next week. But we're going to kind of hit high level on some of the different attacks and indicators of compromise, and then we're going to dive a lot deeper into injection attacks, and then also how to mitigate and prevent those attacks when we dive into 2.5. But we've got a ton of work to do this evening, and I am glad y'all are here with me. Jesse, what is shaking? Great to see you. Next week's going to be 2.5. I'm going to do 2.4, and we're going to touch on a couple concepts of 2.5, but it's going to be kind of a rehash of some of 2.4, and then we'll dive fully into 2.5 next week. So it's going to be an awesome lesson tonight and an excellent lesson next week, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with y'all. So Objective 2.4 is given a scenario, analyze indicators of malicious activity. So when I read this, I look at it as what are the attacks and what do the attacks look like? And how do you identify these attacks on your network in the event that they are happening? And from there, when we get into 2.5, we get into mitigation techniques. How do you prevent the attacks? Is the volume low? Good evening, Frank. Good to see you. Volume's good for Jesse. Anybody else has any input, let me know. I can always crank it up a little bit, but I tend not to mess with my settings too much. All right, so get into malicious activity here. Oh, too many slides there. So malicious activity, the first thing that a lot of people think of is malware. Malware is going to be any one of a number of different malicious software, malicious code that can occur within your organization. So you have everything from viruses, which spread based on a user action. So somebody clicking something, somebody opening a link, going to a website that has watering hole poisoning, essentially where you have something hidden in the background on the website that is downloaded upon accessing that website. Worms, they can spread with no user action. So once they're on, they are self-replicating, they grow, they move, and they're hard to stop. Trojans, essentially, if you were around in the early 2000s and you used LimeWire, Kazaa, anything like that, and you downloaded a cracked version of Age of Empires or StarCraft, and then all of a sudden your computer is running real slow, chances are there's a Trojan hidden somewhere in that software. So it looks like it is desirable software. It may even be a functioning piece of software, but in the background of that software, hidden in the code somewhere, there is malicious software that is going to download additional software to your computer, start taking over the system, exfiltrating data, or even just locking your computer up and bragging to you about it, as it used to be back in the early 2000s. It was more about showing off and being able to get your software out there and get people to recognize it, as opposed to the essentially economy that we have behind malware today, that it is, it's as much function as a full-fledged software company where you have entire teams, support teams, you have development teams and everything else. So a whole different landscape today than it was 20 years ago. Remote access Trojan kind of falls under that same Trojan. You're getting remote access into a system, essentially giving a backdoor into a system. Yeah, Margarita, I don't mess around. We get right into this, and then hopefully have a little time for some jaw jacking at the end and chat once the work has been done. So spyware, this we're very familiar with from years ago. We always had I mean, I remember in high school having to go on teachers' computers and just cleaning spyware off of their computers because I mean, they just couldn't resist clicking on stupid stuff all the time. And that was probably half my job in high school, working as a intern for the school, working with the IT administrator, was cleaning spyware off of people's computers. But essentially, it monitors your activity. It can essentially track what websites you're going to, what you're doing, and then also log your keystrokes. So it can steal passwords, it can steal credentials. So spyware is definitely still present today. It's definitely not as big as it was 20 years ago or even 15 years ago, but it's still there. So ransomware is something that we're all very familiar with nowadays. That is the big money in malware. Essentially encrypting user files and demanding a ransom, or stealing their data using that ransomware, being able to lock their systems down, steal their data, and then they require a payment in Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever coin they're wanting, and they're not going to unlock your data until they get it from you, or they're not going to give you your data back if they've exfiltrated the data and taken it from your systems. A lot of the times they will also delete your backups. So you are stuck with what they have, the data that they took from you or the data that they locked up, and you have to pay them. Logic bombs, these are something that you see typically from insider threats more often than not. Essentially, you get somebody who's disgruntled, somebody who's being laid off, or they have been laid off, but they still had access into a system. They write a piece of code that will go off at some point in the future. You don't know when, but it can take down an entire system. It can lock up systems. It can perform a denial of service attack against your network. Hard to say, but there's a lot of different ways that you can implement a logic bomb, but it's essentially a delayed release malicious software. Rootkits, you will see a couple different kinds of rootkits. You have kernel level rootkits, which give an attacker full access to the resources of the computer, or you have user level rootkits, which can give you access to other users' permissions within the system. So you're able to get those administrator rights by using a user rootkit, be able to gain other users on that system gain their privileges. A kernel level rootkit will give you full root access level, or root level access to that computer, and give you that access to be able to do anything they need to do, view any processes, memory, everything. So rootkits are definitely a bad thing. They used to be very prevalent years ago. They still are, but you don't see them as much because a lot of the time you need to have some sort of way of getting physical access to that computer. If you're doing a kernel level rootkit, it's harder to do and escalate that from a remote situation, or from a remote like command and control kind of process. But it still is definitely something that can be installed and still be a threat to your organization. Backdoors, I kind of talked about that with the remote access Trojan. It gives you a unauthorized mechanism for accessing a system. So it gives an attacker some way to get in. That can be a piece of software. It could be firmware. If they've poisoned the supply chain and been able to put in firmware with a backdoor installed, so they can get into the administrative interface of a router or a switch, and give them that access into the system. Botnets are essentially a network of compromised systems. So you see a lot now where these distributed denial of service attacks, these DDoS attacks that happen, and you essentially have a network of computers that people may not even realize that they're infected. But when these command and control servers come online and they want them to do something, all of these zombie computers will perform those actions as they're told, and send out lots of SYN requests to a particular IP address, or send a lot of DNS requests, and be able to flood a service, or flood services coming in, or flood a particular web server, overload its processes, and essentially crash that server, or just overload the connection to that server so they're not able to send any communications, essentially rendering that service denied. You're not able to gain access to it. And then bloatware, something that you don't typically see a whole lot of, and I'm not sure if you'll really even see this on the exam. I have yet to see even a practice question with it, but essentially unwanted software installed at the same time as legitimate application install. This is something just to be more aware of. But like when you're installing software and you see the check boxes for like as you're clicking through just next, trying to get something installed as quickly as possible, slow down and read what you're installing, because there sometimes are secondary applications that it will download and it'll automatically install as part of that primary application installation. That was a lot more prevalent even 5-6 years ago. Don't tend to see it too much anymore, but it all depends on how reputable the software is that you're installing to begin with and how they're generating their money. All comes back to money. Typically those secondary installs they're being paid to have that as part of that original desirable software being installed. Space Tacos, good evening. Great to see you. Glad you got your stickers. I was happy you sent me those photos. That was awesome. Evan Kirstein, welcome to the party. So indicators of compromise. There are a lot of different things that can indicate compromise, and not every IOC is necessarily a actual compromise. It could just be somebody did something out of the norm. It could be somebody that woke up in the middle of the night and decided they wanted to do some work, and that set off triggers in your SIM system. It's something that, when you have an indicator of compromise, it's something that should be investigated and isn't necessarily a final verdict that you have been hacked or that you've been breached. So you look at the digital footprints, essentially what the modus operandi of an attacker is. So what actions do they take? How do they usually get in there? You look at it as the attribution. So a lot of Microsoft, Google, a lot of the major threat companies, the threat intelligence companies, they look at the footprints and how these attackers work and what their preferred software is, their preferred way of entering a network. And those are, it's like a fingerprint or a footprint. So you're able to see how these attackers work and be able to attribute the actions to a particular actor. And once you have several different steps tied together, that's when you tie it all into being able to attribute it to a particular group. Being able to link IP addresses, that is being able to blacklist those IP addresses in your network, being able to prevent communication with those IPs. It's helpful, at least knowing what those dangerous IP addresses are, but IP addresses are easy to change. So that is not always an indicator, but typically the region of an IP address or where that IP address, if they're using a VPN, where's it being routed through, or what service is routing it can also give you a little bit of idea of who might be doing it. Though again, IP addresses are easy to change with a VPN, or just being able to route through a botnet, whatever it is, it can definitely be an easy one to change. Software and code, that's going to be harder for an attacker to change. I'm going to get to the pyramid of pain here later on, but the software and code, when you have a preferred software, a preferred way of doing things, you're not going to change it. And if you do, you're going to change it minimally. You're going to have a particular way of operating things. The way that each individual writes their code it's just like your handwriting, it's unique to you, and it's very, very hard to change that. So that is something that threat intelligence companies use to attribute attacks as well. And then your hash values, essentially malicious files, you can drop them in to different websites, different malware websites, and be able to attribute those, figure out what kind of malware it is, figure out what it is from there. You can also use the hash values, the digest, to essentially monitor for certain applications being installed or certain malware being installed, and be able to prevent it from being installed once it's downloaded to the system. Your endpoint detection will be able to detect it and then remediate it, removing that threat from the system before it can be installed and provide an attacker a foothold. So as far as the types, command and control. So you have essentially a control server that attacker can send commands to, and then that control server sends commands onto the victim system. And those are common for botnets. They're common for Trojans, your remote access Trojans, or your backdoors, depending on how they're set up, being able to pop a remote shell, have that remote access into a system. IP addresses, host names, and domains. If there are domains you don't recognize, host names you don't recognize, that can definitely be indicators that you have somebody in your network that you don't necessarily want to have there. Abnormal system usage. When you see a server coming online at midnight and it shouldn't be doing that, it shouldn't be running these processes, it shouldn't have 90% processor usage at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when it's the lowest activity time, or a certain backup gets pushed from running at 3 a.m. it gets pushed to 10 a.m. the next morning. Things like that can be indicators that something else has tied up that process in the meantime, and that there's something that needs to be done. Get out of there. Sorry, my puppy is chewing on things next to my desk. All right, movement between systems. Seeing essentially a user being able to move from an endpoint to a server, and then from that server deeper into the network, into other various systems, being able to track and attribute certain logins and how they're moving through a system can absolutely be a indicator that there's something fishy going on. Creation of files and directories. You often see this with malware when you're putting in a command and control beacon in. You'll have essentially they'll create a file or a directory inside the Windows directory, inside System32, and giving it administrative privileges because it's in a certain directory that by default has those privileges. And so it runs and it evades a lot of detection by your EDR, by your endpoint detection and recovery or remediation. So being able to monitor for creation of files and directories, especially in sensitive directories, and being able to prevent that is key when defending against malware. And then back to our ransomware, encryption and data exfiltration. So being able to watch for large amounts of data being moved across your network, watching for files that are encrypted, even if it's just 1 or 2 files, but they're not supposed to be encrypted, or you have the rights to be able to read those files, but you can't, and there's some other there's encryption on that storage volume or on those files or that directory, can definitely be an indicator, and then you've got to do a little digging to figure out why. So the different attacks that we run into, I'm going to start with password attacks, and this is something that you are going to see a lot of on the exam. They do get a little confusing, and it's because they technically are all brute force attacks, but when you get into it, and it's the different ways that they present it in the questions that differentiates it. So you've got brute force, which is just iterating through passwords until access is granted. So you essentially are sitting there with an automated tool, and it is just taking username John, and it is pumping in every variation of passwords that you have in a dictionary or in a designated file until they can gain access. And so it could just start with 7 A's and then goes to 6 A's, 1 B, and then it continues iterating all the way through. Now, brute force is going to be a lot easier for a defender to identify because there's going to be a lot of failed login attempts for one user. And if you have your password policies configured properly, you won't have any issue there because it will lock that account out and put it on a delay until access can be granted back to the user. Password spraying is a type of brute force attack, but it typically uses 1, 2, maybe 5 different passwords. But the attacker normally has a list of accounts, and they're going to start trying all these different passwords against these accounts to see who can figure it out, or which account's going to be using that particular password. So like over here, you've got the attacker punching in Carrie 1976 and trying it against all these users. Well, Carrie W down here uses what I would assume is her first name and her birth year as her password. All stuff that can be gathered through open source intelligence and basic things. I mean, you look at some of these other passwords, hey, that's not a bad one there. Got the carrot mommy issues 1960. That's actually not too bad of a password. Got a special character and got a long password as well. But I mean, that's the thing though, is like password spraying. If you can kind of cobble together a list of names, dates, pet names, cars, things like that, and you can have a little bit of understanding of what this person's interested in, their hobbies and things like that, you can create a dictionary of passwords that you can try against an organization or against a group of users to try and be able to log in. Dictionary attacks, these are typically going to be used to brute force a hashed password. So essentially trying to take a hash and then find a match for that hash from a list of words. So you have various dictionaries online. Trying to remember the name of the one. I'm sure y'all can throw it in chat. Rocku.text. I mean, you have a list of 200,000 words, and you can set it up to iterate combination of those words, adding numbers on the end, certain lengths of numbers, with like John the Ripper and different password cracking tools. And once you find a match to that particular hash, then you got the password for that system and you can log in. So you can expedite that as well. There are pre-computed tables called rainbow tables that are, you know, here are passwords that were breached in a password breach or a credentials dump. And, you know, here's a list of passwords, here's their hashes. And so it's very quick to look up. Here's, you know, I've got a list of 10 hashes. Let me go punch through this rainbow table and see if any of these match. And you may be able to get a hit because people are not very creative with their passwords. So it's probably been used before. People reuse their passwords. And I mean, you may even find that particular person in that data dump and have that password ready to go by just comparing the hashes of the passwords. But but as I was saying, with the automated tools, I mean, you essentially can go and start punching in various usernames and passwords. You can automate a lot of these attacks, but with proper defenses and being able to rate limit logins, limit the number of logins before an account gets locked out, you can prevent a lot of attackers from being able to get in if they're trying to brute force their way in, or even password spray their way in, unless they have an idea of what that password is, and they just have to figure out what user it is, and then they're just trying one password for each user all the way down, like in this diagram here. So the multiple login attempts is definitely a big indicator for somebody trying to brute force their way into your network. So application attacks, I reused a couple diagrams here from last week. I wanted to touch briefly again on these, but I want to dig in deep into them next week. I really want to get into the SQL injection and cross-site scripting and give y'all a thorough dive into it. So I'll probably plan for an hour next week that we're going to dig in deeper on this and kind of dive in. I'll probably have a couple demonstrations, that kind of stuff to give us a little bit more, and probably not have any quiz questions next week. So we've got a full hour to play with this stuff. But definitely something that we want to dig into. And as far as like the mitigation, logging is big. Being able to log what is being queried to your database will definitely give you those IOCs. But prevention is typically being able to limit what can be entered, being able to parameterize queries, being able to essentially standardize the queries that go in and remove anything like this 1 = 1 from the query. When you're able to strip off the malicious part of the query, it'll prevent attackers from being able to break in and get into your web server, be able to inject different code, be able to do directory traversals, things like that. So, but we'll dig into this more next week. I just wanted to make sure it was included, and we are definitely aware that this is going to be a big part of the exam. There's definitely going to be a lot covered on injection attacks and directory traversals, cross-site scripting, things like that. Physical attacks. This is essentially breaking and entering. So how do you get into a particular facility? How do you compromise that facility? How do you, essentially get physical access into their systems? So things like breaking down doors, cutting locks, lock picking, ramming a car through the front door. It all works. It's all different levels of presence when you do it. If you're running a car through the front door, it's probably going to be very loud. Picking locks or cutting locks is probably going to be a little quieter. If you're kicking doors down, it's probably going to be pretty loud and let the security guards know. But definitely something that being aware that cutting chain link fences and jumping fences, things like that, are considered those brute force attacks against a physical building, physical presence. Radio frequency identification, so your RFID cloning, essentially cloning access badges, key cards, or access tokens to gain entrance. So being able to get access to somebody's badge. You meet up with them in the bar and clone their badge as it's hanging off their belt, and they're none the wiser using your flipper 0 to clone it. Though you have to hang out there for a while with the flipper. Even sometimes cloning a hotel card, it can take 2-3 minutes to clone that card. So you got to be you got to get the really hot chick to go and distract him while you're holding that flipper up against his waist, and trying not to let him realize that you've got your hands all over him while he's getting chatted up by the pretty blonde. But that is definitely something. If you listen to a lot of the podcasts and everything else, they talk about penetration testing. Cloning badges is absolutely something that is doable. Sometimes you see where they'll pop open the actual scanning, the actual terminal where you would swipe your badge, pop that open, put a receiver in there to gather that information as people authenticate in to get into the building, and then go back later, pull that little that receiver out and take that data and be able to write cards and gain access to the building later on. Environmental attacks, targeting the heating and cooling systems, sprinkler systems, lighting, essentially being able to take down systems that support operation of the facility. So if you're able to take out the cooling system in a server room, things are going to start to heat up. Things are going to crash because the heat's going to get too high, and you're essentially creating a denial of service for those servers that are stored. Activating the sprinklers when they shouldn't be activated. Water and electronics don't mix. We all know that. We've all dropped our phone in a puddle or in a pool or whatever. Water and electronics do not mix. So being able to remotely access sprinkler systems, trigger them to come on, could be an attack on a center. Something that the book didn't say, but I wanted to include, was natural disasters. Now, this isn't necessarily a attack by an individual or anything like that, but it is something that as we get further on in Security Plus, when we get into disaster recovery and things like that, it is something that you have to be aware of. Being able to plan for things like hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes, earthquakes, just acts of nature that you have absolutely no control over. They are considered physical attacks on information systems. They are an attack on a business, and you've got to be able to have a way to protect yourself or provide that business continuity in the event that something like that does happen. So I just wanted to include that in there, because that is something that you got to keep in mind, that it's not always a particular person doing something that can impact the confidentiality, the integrity, or the availability of your data. It can be an act of God or an act of nature that can cause that as well. So our network attacks, it's a distributed denial of service. So there are when you get into DDoS, there's a lot of different things. Good evening. Is that Pyrus? Pyrus CS. Good evening. Welcome to the party. So happy to have y'all here. We got a bunch of y'all in chat tonight. It's great to see y'all. So we've got a couple different ones, and this is kind of just the start of it. So you've got your botnet, you've got an attacker controlling a series of computers, and then more computers and more computers that are controlled beyond that. And essentially being able to use and leverage those zombies or those bots to flood a system and deprive it of the resources it needs to perform its functions. So that can be CPU load, by taxing the CPU so much that it cannot process anything, essentially slowing it to a crawl and preventing it from being able to do anything. It could be flooding it with large amounts of data. So the actual connection, the network connection, is being flooded with too much traffic and it can't handle that amount of data, causing it to slow down and not be able to provide services. So botnets are definitely something that in years past have been prevalent. They still are out there. They kind of have this ebb and flow as far as popularity and usage, but definitely something to be aware of, and seeing how that looks when you are a defender and you see attacks coming from numerous IP addresses from different parts of the world, and knowing that there's something, it's not just one point that is causing this, that it's multiple, causing that denial of service. And there are companies like Cloudflare and Akamai that have defenses in place that, you know, they can mitigate, but not necessarily always eliminate these kind of attacks. But there are protections that are able to start blocking those IP addresses and start essentially doing a DNS sinkhole on that traffic, essentially taking all that traffic and just dumping it to zero, dumping it into a black hole. Your amplified DNS, essentially what this does is you have a bot that reaches out and they send a specially crafted packet over to OpenDNS servers. And that bot, the way that the packet is written is as if this server was the one sending the request. So the bot is sending these requests, and then the DNS servers are replying to those requests, but replying to a different computer. And that computer is sitting there going, well, I didn't ask for this. Like, what are you doing? And it doesn't know what to do with the data, but the bot keeps sending that data and it keeps getting sent over to that target server. Eventually that server runs out of processing power because it's got so many different things just hanging there waiting to be processed, and it doesn't know what to do with them, and will run out of resources. And then also similarly, the reflected distributed denial of service, the TCP handshake, a threat actor will use a bot to send a spoofed SYN packet. So it essentially will say, I am server A and I'm sending you a request to connect. The victim responds, but the bot is not server A. It's not going to receive the SYN ACK of the TCP handshake. The targeted victim is going to send out all these SYN ACK requests and nobody's going to respond. And so it's sitting there waiting, and it never gets a response. But unless you have it configured to time out in a short enough period for that response, it's going to sit there indefinitely with all these handshakes waiting, and it's got processes tied to those handshakes, and it's going to run out of resources and cause a denial of service. So those are the three that are definitely need to know for the exam, how they work, ultimately what they do, but they are all denial of service. But you will see often questions that they talk about sending a SYN packet or sending a DNS request, a crafted DNS request. And that's going to be the difference between an amplified or reflected attack. And you will see those questions on the exam. So kind of digging a little deeper into the DNS attacks. So the big one that you'll see, so DNS, I'll go ahead and start with DNS flood, because that was essentially what I had shown in the denial of service. It essentially is a denial of service. You're sending a large amount of spoofed packets to the DNS server, and then it is responding, but there are so many responses, or you're sending such large packets to the DNS server, it can't maintain it cannot maintain that amount of data. It cannot respond to it, and so it denies legitimate users from getting access. Space tacos, so none of those would technically be a buffer overflow, though it essentially is more a resource drain on the system. A buffer overflow is going to be typically attacking an application directly and being able to force it to dump data into another process. But I can, as part of the injections and things like that, which I'll cover next week, I will be going over buffer overflows and digging a little deeper into those attacks. Iris, that's awesome. Yeah, I vaguely remember that, where there were people getting very interesting items sent to their houses. And if I remember correctly, the people that were doing it with stolen credit cards, which was really funny, but also bad for the people whose credit cards got stolen. But pretty sure that somebody received like a 55-gallon drum of KY jelly sent to their house. Like I remember seeing it on Reddit. There are some really goofy things that were showing up at people's houses when that happened. But yes, it is something that is available on Amazon. You can get a 55-gallon drum of KY. If it's something that you're interested in, you just need a lot of it, you can absolutely get it. So just the more you know. So we can absolutely stray from topic here. But big things with DNS attacks. DNS poisoning is going to be the one that you're probably going to see more often on the exam. It is essentially a attacker is sending DNS entries to a DNS server. They're sending fake entries over to that server and forcing that server to update what should be a valid URL, redirecting that URL to a different IP address to a fake website. So if you think the real websites say JP Morgan, like a Chase Bank or something like that, and an attacker sitting there and says, no, Chase Bank is this IP address, it's this IP address, and you keep forcing those requests on the DNS server, trying to update it, and eventually it takes, or if it's not updating quickly enough and correcting that information, clients can request it, and while the attacker's injecting those fake entries, it'll send that fake entry over back to the client and connect them to a fake website that may look like the real bank website, be able to collect credentials, be able to drop on sessions, and essentially be able to steal login credentials for those users for the real website, and then cause a lot of trouble. So DNS poisoning is definitely something you will see on the exam. DNS tunneling it's something that is becoming more and more prevalent, where you have essentially data being sent from a victim computer to the attacker, but it's using DNS, so using port 53, using DNS protocols to hide the data, because DNS often is allowed through firewalls. It is not something that is going to be blocked. So you have malicious traffic being tunneled through the DNS protocol, and so they're able to exfiltrate data. They're able to use it as a command and control channel, however the attacker wants to use it. But being able to monitor that DNS traffic and having systems in place to be able to recognize patterns in DNS traffic, because if you think about it, humans are not, we don't do things in a systematic behavior. We're very erratic when we request things, when we're using resources. It's never on the 32nd every minute. It's it's gonna be at 14 seconds, it's gonna be at 44 seconds, it's gonna be at different times when we're making these requests. Whereas if it's a command and control server, it's probably going to do it on a pretty regular basis and within a certain time period. And so you start to see bell curves, you start to see spikes at certain time slots, and that'll trigger on your SIM. If you have it tuned properly, you'll be able to see these connections in DNS that every minute at the 20-second to 30-second mark, we get spikes in DNS traffic. And okay, let's dig into that. Let's see why it only happens in that 10-second period. Well, look, there's, we've got DNS tunneling happening. We've got malicious activity happening across the DNS through DNS traffic. That is it for DNS. So network attacks, this is kind of a broad thing here. So you've got, essentially your on-path attacks or your attacker in the middle. Let me see. Mithril Beata, good to see you this evening. Just saw you in here. Yeah, absolutely. You making those analogies, like Pyrus said, when you can relate a concept in cyber to something that you know in real life, or you've got a connection to, or something that it just helps it sink in a little bit more. And it doesn't matter how silly it is. If it works for you, it works. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I've got some very goofy ways of learning and just remembering things, and just, sometimes I'll even go into ChatGPT and just go, hey, I want to learn this. I have this list of terms or this particular process. Make me a mnemonic for it. And you know what? Make it funny, make it something silly, make it stupid so I can remember it. And ChatGPT can absolutely help you with that, and give you a mnemonic operator, a mnemonic device that you can use to remember, certain processes, or part of the software development life cycle, things like that. Just being able to however you remember, whatever helps you learn. There's no wrong way to do it, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Yeah, Space Tacos. I love that movie. Mars Attacks is such a great movie, and the ensemble cast in it was just incredible. And but yeah, that was like the easiest way to remember Synac, or Synac. That was the easiest way to remember that, was just thinking of Mars Attacks. Absolutely. So jump back on topic here. Man-in-the-middle attacks. So it is essentially a broad term that includes on-path attacks. So the attacker doesn't necessarily have to be in the same communication path. They just have to be able to eavesdrop on that communication. So they can operate as a third party that's able to listen along the path and be able just to monitor those communications and be able to access that communication path, or they can sit in the middle in between and be able to receive that information, unencrypt it, look at it, modify it, and then continue sending it on to the second party. So the third party sitting in the middle is sitting there and being able to modify that data, or be able to take sensitive data out of it, or manipulate the data being sent. So you will see both terms on the exam, either man in the middle or attacker in the middle, depending on how CompTIA is referencing it. My book has it written both ways. On-path attacks, just remember that a man-in-the-middle attacks include on-path attacks, but not all on-path attacks. I guess, no, ignore me. I don't really distinguish a huge difference between them. The way that they want you to remember is that, you could have on-path attacks that aren't necessarily man-in-the-middle attacks, but you've got to have something in the middle here for it to be on-path. So you've got to have a way for it to, for somebody to eavesdrop or to be able to manipulate the data in the middle. And they don't necessarily have to be in the middle. It can be data being sent kind of around the horn when that happens. Wireless attacks are super cool. Something that I like to play with. The evil twin, rogue access points, and leveraging disassociation or jammers to be able to leverage wireless attacks. So you can take an organization's access point and you can send a dissociation request. and essentially knock all the devices off that network. And when you do that, if you have an evil twin set up, you have an access point that has the same name, same credentials. Those victims, if your signal is strong enough, you can absolutely have them connect to you. And if you have it configured properly, you're going to be relaying data. You're going to be relaying that data from your access point to the genuine access point and into the network, and using your rogue access point to eavesdrop and essentially collect all the data that's being transmitted. So evil twin and rogue access points, kind of very similar, but rogue access points, I mean, you could just have somebody, I mean, sitting in an airport with just free Wi-Fi. And when you log into it, you've given them credentials. You can have it set up as even something like, Comcast Xfinity, or whatever the public Xfinity access is for subscribers, and like you have your wireless access points to your house broadcast a guest network. You can make a mimic of that and go sit in a Starbucks, and people's computers will automatically connect to your network because it's probably something that they've connected to in the past. And if you put in the landing page and have them log in, you can start collecting credentials and all sorts of stuff. So definitely something to be aware of. Rogue access points and evil twins. I mean, I know of some organizations recently that I've actually found in their warehouses and in their manufacturing rogue access points that they had no idea were sitting on the network, but had been installed by their managed service provider, and not being managed by the organization. But I mean, access points that, had very low firmware levels, they were unsecure, and essentially facing enough to where somebody sitting in the parking lot could actually access them. So it's definitely something to be aware of, be able to have visibility into your network, to be able to look for things like this, and be able to identify, with your heat map or however your network is set up, see if there are actually access points that are set up outside the parameters that you have for your organization. And then you will see these terms on the exam for Bluetooth. Bluetooth isn't a huge portion of the exam. You might have one question on it, maybe one or two, but just knowing that bluejacking is sending unsolicited messages. So you get somebody that's airdropping memes to you on the airplane, that's theoretically bluejacking. You're sending unsolicited messages to people on the airplane. So when you've got the meme express going on the airplane, that is technically bluejacking. Blue snarfing is unauthorized access to the device. So being able to essentially either brute force your way into a device or be able to eavesdrop on a connection request between devices. So between a smartwatch and a cell phone, and be able to collect that data and be able to see the pin to pair and what the request is, and being able to forge a valid token to be able to connect in between. So you can have you have Alice and Bob as your two devices. It could be a phone and a smartwatch, but then you have Charlie in the center that is going to be able to impersonate the two devices. So whether it is impersonating the application or impersonating the actual device itself, being able to bridge that communication and be able to essentially manipulate the data going in between, or be able to collect that data and eavesdrop on anything sensitive that's being transmitted between the two. And I don't particularly like the words master and slave on here. That's not, we've kind of moved away from that in the industry. But I do like the Alice, Bob, and Charlie examples when we do get them, especially for private key, public key kind of stuff, using those three. Only reason I chose that particular image. Other indicators of compromise, things to know for the exam. Account lockouts, concurrent sessions. So when you see accounts getting locked out left and right because somebody is doing password spraying or they are trying to brute force logins, that is definitely something that you want to keep an eye on in your organization. Concurrent session usage. You have John logging in, and he's logging in from multiple locations, even if they're still within the same geographic area. But he doesn't normally do that, or he shouldn't be logging in on two different PCs in the organization. Definitely something to examine and see what's going on. Those concurrent sessions could also be part of the impossible travel, where you have a login from Maine, and then you have a login from Texas, and they're within 10 minutes of each other. Unless that user is Superman, that can't happen. So there's definitely something going on there. Oh, Jesse, come on. Charge your damn phone. Sorry, Kennedy. No, that sucks, man. I've definitely been there. Actually, over the weekend, I forgot to charge my phone a couple times, and I was running like 30% all day for multiple days. Well, Pyrus, he could use public chargers if he's got one of the little USB condoms. You can use those to protect yourself from data exfiltration. I've picked up a couple of them at conferences. Keep them in my backpack for when we're traveling. But continuing on with the other indicators. So beyond the concurrent session usage and the impossible travel, I relate that, like I said a minute ago, the Superman paradox. Unless that user's Superman, he cannot be in Maine one moment and Texas the next, or in Florida and then Germany within an hour. So there's no possible way for that user to be in both locations at the same time or in that short period of time. So being able to monitor for those logins or that movement of users and how quickly they move from one location to the next. Blocked content. If you see essentially content being requested or trying to be accessed on a computer, you essentially have applications trying to be run on a computer, or you have websites that are trying to be accessed, or requests to block domains is absolutely something that should be investigated, especially if they persist and if they're consistent. Can be signs of a command and control server or a command and control beacon trying to reach out. So definitely something to investigate. Resource consumption. You see this a lot with crypto miners. You have a crypto miner on a server and it is just using 98% of the processor power, and you're not able to utilize your applications, or it's just everything is really, really slow. Excessive resource consumption. This could also be network traffic if there's excessive traffic on the network. Really any resource that you use, if you see a spike in it, if there's more than what is normally happening, it's typically an indicator of compromise or of suspicious activity. That also kind of leads into resource inaccessibility. So you get that denial of service. That can absolutely be a part of your indicators of compromise. Out of cycle logging. So like I talked earlier, if you have an attack occurring and the say, normally a server updates at 2 a.m. or you get a backup at 2 o'clock in the morning, but you look at the logs and you see that, well, that day it did it at 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, why did it do it at 10 o'clock in the morning? Why is it out of its normal cycle for that event to happen? You dig into it and you see that, okay, well, it was going to start, but instead all the files got encrypted and that server's locked down. So when the backup ran, all it did was back up all the encrypted data. Well, that for that period of time, that backup was delayed because of that encryption occurring on that server, and you've got ransomware on that server at this point. So, Space Taco's a USB data blocker. That's my USB condom. That's it's essentially a write blocker, but it just allows the charge functions for for your device on public USB chargers and stuff like that. And then missing logs. Attackers will try to cover their activity. So if you see that there are gaps in time or there are logs completely missing from a server, then that is absolutely an indicator of compromise. Again, just more examples. So unusual network traffic, anomalies in privileged user account activity. So weird login times, concurrent logins from outside the normal geographic area. Increases in database read volume. This would be an indicator of data exfiltration. Large numbers of requests for the same file, data exfiltration. Mismatched port and application traffic. You start seeing HTTP requests across DNS. That's mismatched port application traffic. HTML response sizes. That could also be tunneling large amounts of data across HTTP or HTTPS, using that as a data transfer. Unusual DNS requests, again, kind of getting back to the mismatched port and application traffic. Suspicious registry or system file changes. Most of your endpoint detection and remediation systems will monitor registry or system files for changes. And that absolutely, I mean, you get command.exe changed out for a command and control beacon, can absolutely be something that you want to monitor. Hey, good night, Frank. Thanks for joining us this evening, and it was great chatting with you earlier today. So, but suspicious registry and system file changes. I mean, essentially hiding malware within the system, within what looks to be the real file. And then anomalous file activity. So just looking for, processes running out of weird directories. If you have a process that's running out of the documents directory, under the users directory, that's probably not normal. You don't normally have applications running out of that. Or if you have a program running out of your logs directory, probably something going on there. But especially those administrative level directories, if you have files being created, files being run, and then applications being run out of those directories, it can absolutely be an indicator that there's something not right. Indicators of compromise, the pyramid of pain. So this I talked about a little bit earlier. I briefly mentioned it. When we talk about it, it essentially is what the attackers use or how you identify attackers and the things that you can do to make it harder for them to essentially be able to hide in the noise. So using things like your hash digest or your IP addresses, attackers can change, 2 letters of code in their program, and all of a sudden the hash digest is different because it's a completely different file. So that is probably one of the easiest things for them to do. And you've got things like polymorphic malware. You've got different ways for them to disguise their malware. So it makes it very easy for them to be able to change the hash digest. But if you get into something like, I'm going to start looking for certain tools being run or artifacts on the network, and those attackers consistently use those types of artifacts or those types of tools, and you have your SIM and your EDR and your intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems tuned for those things, it makes it very challenging for the attacker to be able to move through your network and be able to get a foothold in your network based off of that. It makes it very hard for them. They've got to change a lot of things in a lot of ways that they do things and that they're comfortable with to be able to successfully attack your network. And then of course their tactics, techniques, and procedures, being able to identify the way that they do things, to be able to block the way that they do things, and being able to identify those particular tactics, techniques, and procedures. I try to make that all one word, but being able to do that and be able to identify those and tune your system towards those particular patterns can make it very difficult for an attacker to be able to get into your network, because it's going to be a lot. You become not worth it. You become undesirable at that point because you're a lot harder to get into than somebody who hasn't done all that work and they're just looking at IP addresses and hash digests. Well, those are easy for them to change. They're cheap way to get past your defenses. So definitely something to keep in mind. You won't necessarily see the pyramid of pain on the exam or see questions about it, but it is good to know for as a practitioner in the industry, knowing how threat actors work and what things you can do to frustrate them the most. So that is everything for this evening. I appreciate y'all hanging in there. I know I've run long here. I've gone an hour just talking on our lesson this evening, but I do have some questions prepared so we can jump into that. But if you are new here, please connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Taylor-McDonald1. Happy to connect with you. Any questions you have, but also I definitely can. You can find me in the Discord as well. I'm currently the cyber band burglar, as I got in trouble on Thursday for sending too many gifts in the chat and just being disruptive. But hey, what's the point of being there if I can't have fun too? I'm here to help you learn, but we got to have fun doing it. So kind of stirring the pot's always fun for me. So but yeah, I appreciate y'all coming out, and I'm going to jump into some practice questions. If you want to hang out, I'm going to bring up Vvox, and if you want to go ahead and get to vvox.app in your web browser, we can go ahead and get rocking and rolling here. And where is Vvox? There we are. Perfect. Oh, jumped to the wrong screen here. All right, we are going to start the session and go full screen. Perfect. So if you want to jump into vvox.app, ID is 182323312, and I'm going to do a quick scan of this and drop it into Discord. Find my Discord app, that would definitely help as well. All right, perfect, cool. Got that dropped in. But we will. Base Tacos, thanks for jumping into the chat in Vvox. All right, so we'll jump to the first question here and get rocking and rolling. So for those of y'all still hanging out, looks like I got 2 of y'all participating at the moment. Space Tacos, thanks for coming out. Really appreciate the support and hanging out while I ramble on about everything Security Plus. But our first question of the evening, Susan wants to create a dashboard that shows her aggregated log events related to logins from different geographic locations. Her goal is to identify impossible travel scenarios. Which of the following solutions should she select to accomplish that goal? Would it be an intrusion prevention system, operating system logs, the SIM, so there's security incident and event management, or information and event management system, so security information and event management, or vulnerability scan data? I'll give y'all a couple seconds here. While y'all answer, I'm gonna go let my puppy out real quick before she has an accident. Hang on just a moment, I'll be right back. All right, I am back. So we got 3 of 5. answers. I'm gonna give you another couple seconds here, and then we'll check out the answers. All right, we'll go ahead and close this poll. Dang, we are split across the board. All right, so the correct answer here would be your SIM, so your Security Information and Event Management System. So SIM essentially will correlate all of your logs. It'll correlate data across your organization and across your network, and utilize things like geographic IP information, user IDs, authentication events, and be able to correlate all that to identify impossible travel scenarios. So that geographic IP information, it'll be able to identify somebody in the US versus somebody in the Ukraine or Russia. And if it sees that, John logged in here in the US and then, 24 hours later logs into Russia, well, it's possible that he actually traveled to Russia. But if it happened within 6 hours, it's probably unlikely that he logged in and then somehow got on a plane, got to Russia, and then logged in again within 6 hours, being as a flight even to the UK is going to be 7 to 8 hours. So it's somewhere that impossible travel, being able to set in parameters for certain geographic IP information, and be able to recognize that somebody has traveled further than they realistically could have in that time frame. All right, question number 2. Nation-state driven social media campaigns about the trustworthiness of the US election in 2016 are an example of what type of social engineering? Not really on topic for tonight's lesson, but it is kind of bringing back last week's where we talked about social engineering. I figure it's always useful to have a little bit of a refresher and kind of throw in a couple questions that, aren't necessarily just what we covered in the past hour. All right, I'll give you another moment here. Waiting on answer number 4. But while we're going through these questions, if y'all have any questions for me, or any questions on specific topics, or just a jaw jack while we're going through this, I'm happy to talk, happy to answer questions. So I am an open book, so whatever I can answer, ask away. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll here. So disinformation, that is absolutely the correct answer. So disinformation campaigns used to shift public opinion or accomplish other goals. So think propaganda, disinformation, but those are going to be typically nation state driven and using social media to sway public opinion and to sway perspective on certain events and certain topics. So I know we have an answer there for spraying as well. Spraying is going to be for your password brute forcing. It wouldn't be part of trying to sway public opinion or public perception of a particular event. So Elena wants to determine if password spraying attack was used against her organization. Which of the following indicators would be most useful as part of her investigation? The time the login attempts happened, the passwords used for the failed attempts, the source IP address of the attempts, the failed number of attempts for each user. So read each of the answers and think about which one is going to be, in the event of a spraying attack, which one is going to be the most useful. So they all can have varying levels of usage. And while y'all answer that question, I'm going to go get my dogs back inside because they are barking like crazy and probably barking at my neighbor's cat. So I'll be right back. All right, 3 of 4 answers are in. We're ready to rock and roll. 4 of 4. All right. All answers are in. All right, so we got a pretty wide spread of answers here. So passwords used for failed attempts, the source IP address of the attempts, the number of failed attempts for each user. So in the event of a password spraying attack, you're going to be looking at the somebody using a single common password or a couple different passwords, but normally not a large number of them. But it's going to be, typically the indicator is going to be the passwords that are being used for the failed attempts. So if a single password or 2 or 3 passwords are being used over and over across multiple accounts, we know that it is going to be a password spraying attack. Things like the time, the source IP, and the number of failed attempts don't necessarily indicate password spraying. It could be brute force. It could be any one of a number of different attacks. It could be credential stuffing, where they keep trying different usernames with different passwords and a large number of different passwords. Or they have credentials from another system and they're utilizing those credentials on a different system. So it's hard to say for sure, but being able to look and see that, only one particular password's been used or 2 different passwords were used across 20 different accounts, we've got a password spraying attack. So this is something that it is important to drill the differences between them and just use your best judgment when it comes to the exam, because this is something that you absolutely will have 1 or 2 questions on the exam regarding password spraying, credential stuffing, and brute forcing. So Dana is reviewing her system application logs and notices that a full backup of the application was done at 10 a.m. Hey, we just talked about this. She knows that the job that runs the backup process is set to run overnight. What indicator should she flag this as? Is it unexpected logs, resource consumption, resource inaccessibility, or out of cycle logging? Pyrus, so yes, there are logs that you can actually, depending on the level of the logging that you have configured, syslog can actually log what passwords are being used to try and log into a system. So it'll actually record the failed attempts, but it also record successful attempts as well. Now, in that same regard, you should have encryption on those files. It should be sent to a Bastion host, so something that is going to be off that particular device and not necessarily logged on the device itself. And so that those logs are protected in the event that an attacker were able to gain access to those logs. They wouldn't just have a list of all the successful login attempts, but typically a lot of the time you turn off the successful attempts and you only have the failed attempts that are turned on, and it shows the passwords that were attempted for those failed attempts. So I got 1 of 4 answers. Have y'all stumped this evening, or what do we got going on? Let's get a couple more answers in and we will see what's happening here. So, unexpected logs, resource consumption, resource inaccessibility, or out of cycle logging. That process is supposed to run overnight, but it was done at 10 a.m. Yeah, anytime, Virus. Happy to help. Three of three answers are in. Survey says y'all nailed it. Out of cycle logging. That is absolutely the correct answer. So logging that occurs at a different time than expected. So utilizing those context clues, you know, application was done at 10, the backup was done at 10 a.m., but she knows the job happens overnight. Those are context clues that they're happening at a different time than expected. So the attackers using the backup tool to acquire data, so using it for data exfiltration, or have suspended that process while they're doing other things on that system. So absolutely correct answer, guys. Fantastic. So Mike discovers that attackers have left software that allows them to have remote access to systems on a computer in his company's network. How should he describe or classify this malware? Is it a worm? Is it crypto malware? Is it a Trojan or a backdoor? Give y'all a couple, give you 30-45 seconds to answer, and we'll head on to the next, or head on to the answer. Try not to lose my voice here. I've been talking for almost an hour and a half and throat's starting to get sore again. Lost my voice 2 Mondays ago after getting a severe sinus infection that was not fun. And took about 4 days after losing my voice to get it back. That was rough. Do not wish that on anybody. All right, answers are in, and survey says a backdoor. Nailed it. Great job, guys and girls. So remote access to a system is typically provided by a backdoor. Now, you can have things like remote access Trojans and things like that, but it does not specify a remote access Trojan. So y'all are perfect in your answer here. A backdoor is the best answer for this question. So what type of malware connects to a command and control system, allowing attackers to manage, control, and update it remotely? So it's kind of a misleading question to a degree, because it's not necessarily the type of malware, but it's what does a command and control system connect to, and what are they able to manage, control, and update remotely? I don't know if I can necessarily consider a bot itself malware or anything like that, but you know, I mean, this one should be pretty clear, but it is kind of a confusing way that they phrase the question. But the software that's on it makes it a bot. So kind of one of those that not my favorite question from the test bank, but definitely something to think about, and kind of the way that some of the questions are phrased, even for CompTIA, they can be a little confusing. Yeah, Mithril Beata, that is absolutely correct. I mean, taking in those outside sources, taking in like things that Pyrus has said, and anybody else has said, and just kind of when you're looking at a question and you kind of get that gut feeling about a particular answer, and you have a, you know, maybe a 50-50 shot, and thinking about like, what do I know about this? What have I heard about this? What's familiar? And being able to tie it to what you think is the correct answer. And most of the time, you're going to be correct if you approach it in that regard. So just being able to leverage all these outside sources, whether it's Dr. Gerald Dozier's daily cyber threat briefing, or it's cyber insecurity. You've got, I mean, all these different podcasts. I mean, some of my favorites, Cables to Clouds, Art of Network Engineering. I listen to a lot of just networking, cloud, and security podcasts because there's so much overlap, but it helps all the concepts it helps you tie everything together and help everything kind of click. And even if I don't know a particular topic super well, I know enough about it to be able to answer that question correctly on the exam. So definitely using context clues, using things that you do know and trying to relate them back together, it definitely helps. So we'll go ahead and close this question out. But if you didn't get it from my original explanation, bot is the correct answer here. So bots connect to command and control systems, allowing them to be updated, controlled, and managed remotely. Absolutely correct. So Jason's security team reports that a recent WordPress vulnerability seems to have been exploited by malware, and that their organization's entire WordPress service cluster has been infected. What type of malware is most likely involved if a vulnerability in the software was exploited over the network? So again, context clues in this question. I'd be looking at terms like, I mean, malware is, all of these are types of malware, but when I'm looking at it, I see over the network and start eliminating ones that I know are not going to be specific to networking. Oh, Mithril, yeah, gummy bears. I love gummy bears. Haribo gummy bears, I will murder a bag of those things in a heartbeat. Typically when I'm flying anywhere or I'm traveling, that I've got a bag or two of them in my backpack. But making a tea out of them, that is interesting. I wonder if it's the gelatin that when it breaks down and it's in the tea helps like coat the back of your throat or something. Because like, I mean, honey's good, but I feel like it doesn't last very long, but I could definitely see something like gummy bears. That is interesting. I'm gonna have to give that a shot. I can slam some gummy bears down. We'll maybe put them on top of the tea, or make like a gummy bear tea and have them floating on the top like hot cocoa, like marshmallows on hot cocoa. You get whole gummy bears and melted gummy bears at the same time. Fantastic. But one thing I've been doing, so I used to brew beer quite a bit years ago, and I've gotten out of the hobby. It just takes a lot of time, but I've still got all my old equipment, and I've got a freezer full of hops. So I've been taking hops and making hop tea out of them, and that is fantastic. You can throw a little bit of honey and a little bit of hops in there, and it gives you that kind of brightness and that floral of like drinking a beer, but it's just hops themselves and a little bit of sweetness. So it's very refreshing and very calming. Very interesting. Just it's different than drinking like a black tea or anything like that. All right, all answers are in, so we'll rock and roll to the results. A worm, that is absolutely correct. So worms often spread via networks, taking advantage of vulnerabilities to install themselves on targeted systems and then to propagate further. Worms do not require human interaction, so they do everything all on their own. The other items, a Trojan and rootkits, require human interaction to install. absolutely slay gummy bears after slaying Security Plus. That'll be my reward after I pass the CISP later this month. We'll be slaying a bag of gummy bears after that exam. And then logic bombs are something that's going to have a timer. Won't necessarily require user input, but it's going to be something that is kind of set to detonate down the road. Triggers on a certain date or event. So Amanda notices traffic between her systems and a known malicious host on TCP port 6667. What type of traffic is she most likely detecting? Troll, spyware, worm, or a hijacked web browser? Hey, no barking. I know y'all are getting antsy. I got another 3 questions, a little bit of jaw jacking, and then we can go upstairs. Tony, I'm going to take the CISSP. I'm scheduled for the 29th to take that exam. So it is a bear to be studying for. Definitely have my plate full between work and studying and all the professional networking events and everything else I'm going to. And then teaching this on Monday nights. It's I definitely have taken a lot on, but it's helping me get better at time management and just overall being better at what I'm doing. I'm just trying to be better. So I'm really enjoying pushing myself and pushing for that exam. That it's kind of scary with the amount of information. A lot of it's kind of review from Security Plus and SSCP and pen test and CYSA and stuff like that. But it's just a different perspective on it, and it's more of a managerial perspective. So it makes it a little harder to, in the respect that you have to look at how they're asking the question and then understand what information they're trying to get out of you. So we are split on our answers here. Command and control and hijacked web browser. So command and control, that is the answer here. So it is essentially a botnet's command and control channel. So they're probably using IRCs or Internet Relay Chat as the command and control channel, which would be port 6667. Spyware and hijacked web browsers, they're typically going to use HTTP or HTTPS, so ports 80 and 443. And then a worm is typically not going to communicate out beyond the network. It's normally going to just spread within the network itself. So you wouldn't normally see it as communicating with a known malicious host. Sharif notices that his authentication logs have many different usernames showing failed logins with the same password. What type of attack has he discovered? The credential harvesting, impersonation, business email compromise, or spraying? So kind of practicing what I preach here is repetition, repetition, repetition. So dang, that is awesome, Tony. Your 50 continuing education units and renewed Sec Plus through 2029. That is solid. Dang, that's what, 6 years? Good Lord. Sweet. Yeah, something goofy happened when I passed my Pen Test Plus. It renewed so all my other certifications through CompTIA all renewed out 3 years, which is normal, except for Security Plus renewed out 5 years. And I have no idea why. Like, why that one particular certification just got pushed out another 2 years on top of all the other ones. But I'm not going to complain. It makes it that much longer before I have to renew it. But CompTIA actually recognizes the CISP exam as as continuing education units. So I can actually put in my pass for my CISP and it'll automatically renew my all of my certifications. So everything from A+ all the way up to CYSA and pen test. It'll update all of them at the same time. So looking forward to doing that, and then it gives me easy street for all my continuing education units going forward. So what is Sharif seeing on his authentication logs? If he sees many different usernames with failed logins with the same password, go ahead and submit our answers here. Spraying, that is absolutely correct. Repetition. We keep talking about password spraying, but being able to recognize it in the context of the question is absolutely key. Great job, guys. So Chris is reviewing evidence of a cross-site scripting attack where the attacker embedded JavaScript in the URL that a user clicked. The web page then sent the JavaScript to the user in the displayed page. What term best describes this attack? So this is a preview of next week's lesson, next week, Monday. So we're going to be covering cross-site scripting, injection attacks, both application injection as well as SQL injection, web application injection attacks. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenging one here. So take your best shot and see what happens. So this is just to see if you know what is going on here. If you have any practice with cross-site scripting or studied it at all. So is it a reflected cross-site scripting, stored cross-site scripting, persistent cross-site scripting, or document object model based cross-site scripting? Yeah, Tony, I really enjoyed that. The SOC core skills from Anti-Siphon, that was a fantastic, absolutely fantastic series from John Strand. But yeah, I tune in, at least I try to tune in the mornings, but if not, I'm team replay on the daily cyber threat briefings. ISSA webinars, I try to attend a bunch of them. Trying to think what else I listen to on a regular basis. I've got a boatload of just different cyber podcasts that I rotate through. Yeah, and then just whatever else I can find. Whatever pops up on YouTube that you might be interested in this, I'll go click on it and listen to it for 5-10 minutes. It doesn't really appeal to what I'm studying right now. I'm not gonna, I won't spend too much time on it, but if it's something pretty cool, I'll watch the video, or I'll have it playing in the background while I'm studying. So. All right, we'll close the poll here. Reflected cross-site scripting. Great job. So yeah, this is a reflected attack because the script code is contained within the URL. Persistent or stored attacks are actually stored on the web page itself, where a victim may later access it. So where it may be stored like on a message board, it could be stored in a post on a forum, could be embedded in an image, but that is where you would have a persistent or stored attack, is when it's actually on the website itself and not embedded in the URL. DOM-based attacks, so document object models, so it'd be hidden within the code of the document object model. Tony, you're welcome on the ISSA organization. They've been absolutely awesome for me as well. I've made a lot of really good connections. The monthly meetings are fantastic. I'm going this Thursday. I'll be missing Jesse's stream to go to ISSA Metro Atlanta and go see everybody there. This past Thursday, the Kennesaw State University here northwest of Atlanta, actually, they had their first unofficial ISSA meeting for Kennesaw State University. And so I got to go out and participate with that and support them in their growth and trying to spread ISSA to the college students. And it was absolutely fantastic. I met a lot of really bright young people there that just, I mean, gives us a lot of hope for for cyber as a whole coming up in the future. Had an amazing talk and just great knowledge being shared all the way around, and making these connections with these all these young folks at the college. I mean, it was great to be back on campus. I went there 15 years ago, but it was great to just see the initiative and being able to drive a turnout of almost 30 people for their first meeting. So we're probably gonna have to find a bigger room next time, and hopefully get some sponsors and get everything going. So Pyrus, the KSU meeting, it is targeted at students. Now, I attended, and a couple other professionals in the industry did attend as well, and of course, the speaker as well is a seasoned professional. But so it is targeted for students, and I mean, in all honesty, if you're not a student, I would bring a few bucks to throw towards pizza or whatever the food is that they're supplying if you do decide to come out to it, just to help support the club, because they don't have any currently they do not have any backing from any of the departments or the leadership of their cybersecurity department. So it is something that it is kind of grassroots and unofficial within the school, and I hope that they get recognized and get official recognition soon. But for the time being, it's just going to be a unofficial ISSA club at the school, and I'm gonna go out and support them every month and be part of their growth, and be there to support anything that they need that I can help with. And I don't know what I'm gonna do for them, but I'm gonna be there if they need me for anything. So just put myself out there as one of them, and there to help, because I've got a little bit of experience coming into the industry recently as well. So yeah, happy to be a part of that organization. And then we're getting a lot of them starting to attend the ISSA Metro Atlanta events as well. So we're getting a lot of fresh faces and young minds in the organization. So it's not a bunch of us old farts hanging out talking cybersecurity. We get a lot of inquisitive minds coming in, and it definitely helps steer the conversation to new heights, in my opinion. And yes, I refer to myself as an old fart, and I don't know if I can necessarily qualify for that, but I think I just noticed my light is terrible tonight. What did I do to this thing? That's better. Good Lord, I've looked terrible all night. I'm washed out. Something goofy going on with my lighting here. Yeah, all right, so that is it for... Oh no, we got one more question. So what type of attack places an attacker in the position to eavesdrop on communications between a user and a web server? Yes, lots of new farts. That is perfect. No, we don't need more old ones, we just need new ones. New toots could work too. Speaking of toots, this little girl, if you have ever had a French bulldog, you know what I'm talking about, but good God, they will gas you out of the room. Of all the dogs we've had, by far the worst. And my wife and I have had 8 dogs in the past 12 years, 13 years we've been together, and this dog by far has the worst gas I've ever smelled, and it is consistent. That is the worst part. So on-path attack, that is absolutely correct. So on-path attack, the attacker fools the user into thinking that the attacker is actually the target website and presenting them with a fake authentication form so they can steal cookies. And oh, you're local to Atlanta, Mithril? Well, I can absolutely share a ton of information. So we are all done with our practice questions tonight. And one of y'all nailed it tonight. 11 out of 11. I can't complain with it. 8 out of 11. I think we had a couple people drop out as well, so we got a 5 and a 1. But great job tonight, guys. Let me jump to yeah, Tony, I had it earlier in the slide deck, talking about the on-path attack and man in the middle, and I was kind of looking at it and I was like trying to see where they were saying that, man in the middle is a type of on-path attack, but really they're almost the same. But let me pull up. So ISSAATL.org is our local ISSA chapter. There's also chapters in, I dropped the link in the chat there for you. But there are chapters in Augusta and Macon and kind of around the state as well. But our February meeting is this Thursday. It takes place at 7000 Central Parkway in Sandy Springs. So right down near the Perimeter and Georgia 400 at the, it's kind of in that Dunwoody area. But we're going to be doing threat hunting on a budget. And so we've got Jason Lawrence. He's one of our active members that'll be doing the talk. Great things about these events. The networking is unparalleled. It's a lot of professionals in the area. It is inclusive and very much a very inclusive group. It doesn't matter where you are in your career, in your growth, or in just your learning overall. They are very, very supportive of new members. You don't have to be a member to attend. So you don't have to shell out the money. You can come out, check it out, see if it's something that you actually want to help get into the group. But if you go to the website there and then click on the register, you reserve a spot. It is absolutely free. Again, you don't have to be a member. We do like having more members. It is something that we appreciate, but honestly, it's, in my opinion, a try before you buy. So Pyrus, we met last month. Guess I just don't know you by your handle. So yeah, I'll definitely be there on Thursday, and we'll definitely be chatting it up. But definitely, anybody who's watching this, come on out, check it out. It's a try before you buy. So if you don't want to throw down the money for a membership up front, you can always attend and check it out, and then in a couple months down the road, come and sign up at that point. But it's but we're happy to have the community and happy to have the support just from the people in the industry. So the other thing too, as well, if you can't make it in person, I did forget about this. They do have a Zoom meeting as well. So you're able to attend. They actually put the meeting ID here. So you can actually, without even signing up, you can pop into Zoom and attend as well. So it is absolutely something that Pyrus, ping me on LinkedIn so I can connect the name, your screen name with your actual name if you don't want to throw it in chat. But yeah, I'm preaching the love for Slay Security Plus and Simply Cyber. Mithril, absolutely. The more the merrier. Please come. I would not worry about, if you're coming along to support your significant other, to support a friend, support anybody, we absolutely are happy to have you there. Especially if you're learning, you're growing, you're taking it in. By all means, I definitely would come out. Yeah, definitely check it out. Now, do keep in mind that this overlaps with Jesse's stream. The stream does start at 7 o'clock. So about 7:20 it kicks on. So it's that would be funny. I know it is a small world. So I keep finding that I know people, but don't necessarily know them. Like we may have never met in person, but like we've talked at some point, or we have mutual connections. Like it is an absolutely small world out there. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've got. And Tony, yeah, jump in on the Zoom meeting. They do take questions during the meeting. So if you're participating on Zoom, you'll actually be able to participate in the conversation as well. So definitely come check it out. If you're attending in person, please reserve a spot. Oh, Frank, yes, I do remember you. Yeah, you're the other Frank. So I've got Cybertron. I know him from the ACE 678 meetings and through Simply Cyber, and then yeah, we talked last month, right at the end before we were leaving. I do remember that, absolutely. That's all you had to say. But yeah, Mithril, definitely, if you're planning on attending in person, just reserve a spot. That way they can account for the number of people when they're ordering food. But you do get a meal, and you get some education and some networking. So absolutely a fantastic time. So I hope to see y'all there. I'm going to wrap up for the evening. Got some dogs to take care of and chores to do before I go to bed. So if there are any questions that you have, anything that I can do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out here in the comments, reach out on LinkedIn, reach out in the Discord. I am absolutely open to helping any of y'all with anything you need. Doors always open. Don't be afraid to reach out. Y'all have a wonderful evening. Make it a great week.